guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome if you're new here. Hey, hello, my name is Angela and I make videos about law school, lawyer life, and all things in between. This is going to be our last video of January and we're going to stick with the theme talking about big law, kind of in honor of me quitting my job at a big law firm. I have transitioned totally out of private practice, and so all of the videos have been somewhat related to big law for this month. The first video was I quit big law. The second video was why I quit big law. The third video was a big law Q&A, and it was just answering questions that you guys had asked me either on Instagram or in the community tab. And so if you haven't seen that video, go ahead and check it out. And to end off January, we're gonna be talking about how to get into big law. This is a question I get all the time, so I figured I'd do this really quick and dirty video about how to get in big law, because it's really not that complicated, honestly. I'm not saying it's easy, but there's pretty much a standard way that you can get in. Now, before we get into the video, I just want to give a caveat, a disclaimer that this does not mean that these are the only ways that you can get in big law. There's always exceptions to the rule, you guys, but these are the most common ways that you're going to be able to break into big law firms. This is just the reality of the legal profession, and particularly this sector of the legal profession, okay? So I get it, you know somebody who got in and they didn't go these routes. I'm just telling you the most common and probably the easiest ways to get into big law. So we're gonna talk about 3 routes in this video. So we're gonna talk about the traditional route, the most easiest way to get into big law. We'll talk about a more so non-traditional route, and then we'll talk about lateraling into big law. So first, traditional route. The most common and traditional way to break into big law is to enter in through that law firm's summer associate programs. So every summer, big law firms put on a summer associate program where they have interns come in and work and be like associates for the summer, and this is sort of their vetting process. This is their process to basically hire their next associate class. So majority of the summer associate positions are going to be for 2Ls, but many firms do 1L slots as well. So your summer after 1L or your summer after 2L, there's just usually more after 2L, but if you can get in after 1L, you'll be a shoo-in because they'll most likely invite you back for 2L, and other firms will see that you have gotten in at this firm and they will want you. It's just the name of the game. Big law firms do like to compete with other big law firms, and if you worked at another big law firm, they want you. It's just the way that it goes. This is my experience. I was able to get in one firm as a 1L, and then my 2L, I was able to split my summers between 2 firms. Now, splitting is not as common. Big law firms have realized that a lot of times when you split, you know which firm you want to go to, and you're just using the other firm as a paycheck. And so in order to really recruit and actually have a strong starting associate class, many firms are just requiring that you go the entire summer, but they do make exceptions for certain circumstances and certain people. So that's just a little side note. Now let's talk about how to get these summer associate positions. So if I wasn't clear before, these summer associate positions lead to full-time employment. So that's why that is the easiest route and the most common route, because that is usually how majority of law firms recruit, their first year associates. So the easiest way to get into these programs is to participate in on-campus interviews, and that's the most traditional route. Every law school does them. They're organized by your law school's career services center, and you can submit bids to get interviewed by these various law firms. Now, the thing that can be tricky about OCI is it is not created equally. Everybody is not going to get a chance to participate in OCI, particularly as it relates to the big law firms. And then also, firms don't go to every law school. They can be very selective about what schools they go to. So the main factors of OCI and success at OCI is the better the school, the better opportunities you will have for OCI, because more firms are going to tend to focus there and recruit there. I know it sucks. It really does suck. Like my law school, I went to a lower tier law school, so we didn't have a ton of firms coming to recruit. Luckily, I was in Houston, a big city, so a lot of top firms are located in Houston. And so we'll talk about locale prestige as well here in a bit. But so that's really how it works. So if you go to a T14 school, all of the firms are going to be at your OCI. Now, if you go to a lower tier school like I did, It'll be a select few of firms, and many of them will only be kind of local to wherever your law school is located at. On top of that, the way you kind of get into the door to get an interview at OCI is going to be based on your credentials. So now the top credentials they're going to be looking at is grades. So the better your grades, the better opportunities that you have to interview with these firms at your OCI. Now, other factors will play a part, especially if you go to a lower tiered school, like whether you made law review, whether you're on mock trial, moot court, those types of things that kind of show you're a well-rounded person will also be helpful. It's just what it is. Top grades are going to get you noticed. Now, I will say if you go to a top school, like if you go to a T14, you don't necessarily have to have top grades all the time. Like obviously, you know, top grades are going to get you noticed, but the better the school, I think they relax the standards a little bit. Now, if you go to a lower tiered school like I did, law firms will have very stringent requirements to even interview you. Like for us, if we wanted to interview at the top, I can think of like the top 3 or 4 firms in Houston. That's where I went to law school in Houston, Texas. You had to be in the top 5% of your class. Like you had to. They would not even interview you if you weren't in the top 5% versus the better school you go to, they kind of lax on that. You know, a little bit better is 10%. A lot bit better, it could be 15 to 25. And then if you go to a really good school, it's like top 0.5% of your class. The better the school, the less stringent the requirements are to even kind of get an on-campus interview. On-campus interviews are just the first step, okay? I could do a whole little mini video about OCI. OCI consists of very short interviews, and I've been on both sides. So when I was in law school, I was obviously a law student doing OCI, and it was very, very intimidating. I've also been on the other side representing my law firm, interviewing law students. And it's also kind of intense because you're trying to get to know this person and you're trying to make an assessment of this person in a very, very short time period. And you're interviewing a ton of people. Like it's a full day of interviewing candidates. So it can be very, very intense. If you make it through OCI and they like you, then you go through a process called callbacks. And that's where you kind of have the real interview where you get to meet more people at the firm and people get to know you a little bit more. They'll usually take you to lunch. If you come in person, I know we live in a virtual world these days, but it used to be that you go to lunch and you kind of get to know the firm will get to know you, you get to ask questions, and you be asked more questions. And so once you make it past that process, if they like you, that's when you get the offer to join the summer associate program. And then it's typically smooth sailing from there, unless you do something crazy or you just do really, really, really bad work. But typically from there, it's smooth sailing, and at the end of the summer, you usually get an offer to come back if you're a 1L or an offer to start full-time after you graduate. So that is the most traditional way, the most common way, the easiest way to get into big law. Like I said, though, that's not the only way. That's the most common way. Another not as common, but also, you know, sort of common way is to do things via your network or resume drops. So for example, maybe you did OCI and there were so many interviews and you didn't get the offer, or maybe the firm that you're looking at didn't come near your law school. You can do resume drops. You can reach out to the kind of hiring person at those law firms, drop your resume, a good cover letter, and sometimes they will contact you to come in for an interview. That is another way to get your foot into the door in big law. Don't just rely on OCI. Like I said, OCI is not created equally for each law school. So I wouldn't rest your laurels on OCI. If you're not successful at OCI, I wouldn't let that stop you from shooting your shot at various law firms, especially if you have certain firms in mind that you just didn't get to meet with. On that same non-traditional route, another way is kind of just networking and referrals. I've done interviews where, somebody got an interview because their dad's old colleague, work at the firm, or, somebody knows somebody. So that is another way. Networking, if you know someone, if you built a relationship with a partner or an associate at the firm that you're interested in, and maybe you can talk to them about getting an interview. Sometimes they will refer you to the firm's recruiting committee and kind of get you an interview, again, to get your foot in the door. Other than networking, referrals, resume drops, there's also sort of some special programs that firms sometimes do. Sometimes they do like a, diversity program, or they do internships during the school year. Like I said, most of the traditional internships are going to be during the summer, but sometimes there's school year internships. And so maybe you work there during the school year and they really like you, and then they bring you on as a full-time associate. So there are those opportunities as well. And another question I get is whether you can get into big law like as a 3L. It is very uncommon for big law to recruit, you know, you after your 2L summer, but it does happen, especially if you have connections or you work there, or if for some reason they didn't get as many acceptances from their summer class as they thought. So say they had 50 people come through their summer program, but only 35 actually accepted offers. They might be a little bit more open because they want to fill up their class to make sure they have an adequate first year class for the following year. So it really just depends. But like I said, this is a less common route and just not as easy. You know, there's a little bit more work that you got to do to get in there. And another thing I should say is that at the end of the day, your credentials are probably still going to matter for all of these kind of less traditional routes. So for example, if you do a resume drop, you're in the bottom of your class and you go to a, you know, tier 3 law school, your chances are really slim, right? Like they still want to see the types of credentials of people that they usually recruit when it comes to grades and activities and things like that. So that's just something to be aware of. Okay, so the last path we're going to talk about is lateraling. All that means is that you're already a practicing attorney. You've already been practicing at a law firm or an organization, and you're trying to break into big law. A lot of times in the past when I've talked about lateraling, I'm usually talking about going from one big law firm to another, which is what I've done. That's a much easier path. I mean, once you're in big law, you're in. Like once you're kind of in the club, you're in. Other law firms will take you from other big law firms. So that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about maybe you're working in a more mid-size or a small law firm, or like I said, you're doing maybe in-house, or you're just doing something else. You're not in big law. Lateraling into big law is also a possibility. Also, this is my opinion, but I feel like in the recent years, it's gotten a little bit easier to lateral into big law. I don't know if that's gonna stay just given the way the market is tending to go. If you kind of pay attention to law blogs like Above the Law, some firms have been doing some layoffs. I know tech has been, you know, kind of the focus on the layoff conversation, but law firms are doing that as well, especially law firms who did a ton of hiring over the past 3 years, because we had been so busy during the pandemic. There's a few ways you can kind of get noticed to lateral into big law, and a lot of times there are certain things that's just gonna set you apart. So if you are in a very niche practice area, say you're working in a small law firm, but you're in a very niche practice area, and you kind of built your practice up, and I don't even mean like working for 10 years. I mean, you can be a couple of years out, right? But you're kind of in a niche practice area that like is not as popular as say like M&A or commercial litigation. Those are ways to get into big law, because those niche practice areas are having a harder time recruiting people to come into those. So that's a good way to kind of break into big law. Like you have this niche skill set and firms are looking for that skill set. Another way is if you have like a very prestigious current position, like if you did a federal clerkship, law firms typically respect that and they will kind of look at you and interview you and possibly hire you. When you're looking to lateral, you can kind of go two routes. You can kind of do it on your own when you're dropping your resume to the hiring manager at the firm, you know, with the cover letter and just talking about your experience and your desire to meet with the firms. You can do it that way. Also, networking and referrals works, especially in these past few years, you guys. The firms were so thirsty for associates and the firms were so thirsty for lawyers. They were looking at us like, hey, if you have friends that you think might be interested in working at the firm, give us their names, you know, drop their names. We're recruiting, we're interviewing. And so if you have a friend in big law that could refer your name to the hiring manager, that's also a really great opportunity, you guys. So for you guys in big law, look out for your friends who might be looking to get into big law. Also in that same line, networking. If you're going to different legal events within the community, within the legal community, you are bound to meet people, you're bound to build relationships, and things just kind of organically happen where people will kind of pull you in on their firm. I've also heard of people getting job offers when being opposing counsel to somebody. Like somebody at a big law firm has been so impressed with their work, they're interested in them and want them to come over. So always be on your P's and Q's and do good work and treat people with respect, because you never know who might be your colleague or coworker in the future. Now, so those ways are, like I said, we're kind of where you do it on your own or it happens by chance. The way I would probably recommend, because it's just probably easier because they have the context, is to work with a legal recruiter. A legal recruiter will have these relationships with the firm. They'll know what firms will bite. They'll know what firms won't. Their commission is based off on placing you in a firm. So they will work to get you placed into a firm, because That's how they make their money. And like I said, they have the contacts, they get the early nods, they get the early info when firms are hiring. So that's a really good way to kind of break into big law if you're trying to lateral. Recruiters typically won't work with like recent grads or law students, but they will work with you once you've gotten some experience and you can kind of break into big law. With the recruiter, I will say there's some really great recruiters out there, and there's some ones you might, you know, be a little more skeptical about. At the end of the day, their pay is based on placing you into a law firm. So make sure when you're working with a recruiter that you are doing your own research and your own vetting and making sure that this is the firm that you see yourself at, that you like it, and it's really what you want. Because again, you know, you have to have your best interest at heart, because they get paid off of placing you in a law firm. I've had a really great experience with a recruiter, but I have heard some horror stories. So that's why I just kind of wanted to put that disclaimer out there to, you know, make sure it's what you want and that you're also looking out for your own best interests. All right, you guys, so that's pretty much all I have for you guys. I hope you found this video helpful. If you're a law student or a lawyer and you have some additional input or insight, or even a difference of opinion, put it in the comments, you guys. This is a community. We are here to help each other and support each other in our legal journey. If you haven't already, join our Aspiring Lawyers group on Facebook. I'll put the link to join in the description box below. Make sure you follow me on Instagram at _theaspiringboss. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.